George has a passion for Israel, a knowledge and passion for the African American community and the work between Israel and the church, and he is just a wealth of knowledge. And so as we start this panel, we'd like to start off having George tell us a little bit about the fellowship and what the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews is all about and what that work is. So if you'll start with us, George, welcome, and thank you so much for coming and taking time to be here.
Well, I want to say thank you. I also want to say it's not fair to be tethered to this chair. Everybody else got to walk around. But the fellowship was founded by Rabbi Eckstein at a time when the American Nazi Party wanted to march in Skokie. He was a newly ordained rabbi sent from New York to Chicago, and his job was to go knock on the doors of churches. Orthodox Jew had never met a Christian. He was petrified to come see us, tell you the truth. But what he found was when he knocked on the doors, lots of pastors opened them wide, and up on the dais was the American flag and the Christian flag and the flag of Israel. And the pastors explained that their churches prayed for the peace of Israel every Sunday. Other pastors invited him in and said, "Rabbi, I'm so glad you're here because I'm trying to preach through Leviticus, and I need some help understanding this passage." And that's when he started to see the common roots that we share as Christians and Jews. Pastor Hagee has said that Christianity needs Judaism to explain itself, but Judaism needs only God. But they are our older brothers. They are where our faith is rooted. And so when he left that other organization and founded the fellowship, he started out with meetings like this. Christians and Jews coming together to talk about our common heritage, our common roots. And what we found is what we had in common more than anything else was Israel. And so today, the fellowship is a large, the 192nd largest charity in the United States. Last year we raised about $128 million to help Jews in need around the world. Whether those are Jews in Ukraine or being shot at by pro-Russian separatists, we're helping them get out, come home to Israel. And those that want to stay, we're helping them, we're feeding them, we're providing security for them. Or Ethiopian Jews, we were really among the first that ponied up a 7-figure check and said, okay, now why won't you bring them home? And as Reverend Dede told you, we were part of the final official flight, and what a change. From that big plane that they took all the seats out of, the last flight came on a Dreamliner. I didn't know Ethiopian Air had a Dreamliner, but they rolled it out for this because it was the right thing to do. We're involved with feeding, involved with clothing, involved with providing jobs, helping people integrate into Israel society to be successful. Both of you mentioned the words of Jesus. Both of you referenced John 3:16. But you know what? Think about Matthew 25. And what you get in Matthew 25 is what the fellowship does. Jesus said, I was hungry, you fed me. I was naked, you clothed me. I was sick, you came and visited me. I was in jail, you came and comforted me. And the people say, what? When did we do that? What's his answer?
Least of these.
Least of these my
brethren.
Brethren. Who are the only people Rabbi Jesus would have called brothers? Jews. That's our calling, that's our mission. That's what we do.
All right. So we're going to open it up for some questions from the audience in just a moment, but I want to throw a couple questions to you gentlemen. Let me start, George, with you, and Avi with you, because I don't know how often the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews has been on the same platform with AIPAC. Probably hardly ever.
Not often enough, let's say.
Amen.
Have you ever been on a platform, Avi, with anybody from IFCJ?
I think this is groundbreaking right here. Yeah.
No, actually the groundbreaking was, Christina, when you took me to, where did we go? No, way before that. I came and spoke for AIPAC. Y'all never paid the expenses like you said you would, but that's a different story.
I wasn't working there then.
No, okay. But there is good cooperation, actually. I was a speaker at a program that they were sponsoring at First Baptist in Hammond, and we're working in parallel tracks. I wish we were working more like this, but both working for the same mission.
Yeah, and I bring that up because I think, would it be fair to categorize the International Fellowship, or what you call the Fellowship, as a social service type of an organization?
Yes.
And AIPAC as more of a political organization,
Yes.
if not exclusively political,
Yeah, and rooted in activism, yes.
as opposed to a social service.
Exactly, right.
So Christina King is the one who has kind of bridged the gap, interestingly, between both of your organizations, and for that matter, even with the African American community and the Jewish community at large. And so, my question to both the Fellowship and AIPAC is, looking now in the future, how do you see the relationship with the African American community? Where are the key connections? I would think AIPAC, yours would be politicians and the such, but maybe not. Where do pastors fit into that, that vision of AIPAC? And then where do those who are in politics fit into the fellowship's vision as it relates to the African American community? I want to throw that to both of you.
Sure. All right, I'll start. Well, I think I'm not a very religious person, but I'm learning here just from the words you were just saying. And I think that, as I mentioned before, AIPAC as an organization looks at the congressional districts around this country. There are 435 represented by the House of Representatives and also 100 senators. So our role is critical in making sure that we focus on every district, so that in every district a member of Congress knows they can go to someone who's their Israel person that can educate them, right? Now, the Jewish population at this point, 6 million Jews, we're only in about 10% of those 435 districts. So what that means for us is that we look to the entire country to help with our work, people who are looking to be activists. So for those that are pastors, I think, and I would definitely defer to Christina and Reverend Dede to fill in what I'm missing, but it's important to think of it in this way. I'm Jewish. We work with our rabbis, and our rabbis have relationships with, some of them have relationships directly with members of Congress. The rabbis are leaders in the community, as pastors are leaders in the community. The rabbis have congregations of 100 up until 5,000. So the focus with our rabbis as leaders in the community is to educate their members as we're educating them, to focus on building relationships with members of Congress, and to be a voice in the importance of Israel and how you can advocate. So I'd say it's exactly parallel. We should be more working together, but it's exactly parallel in the sense that Christian or Jewish, pastor or rabbi, a leader in the community has a voice both with those that are at your church and with members of Congress. And if a pastor doesn't have a relationship directly with a member of Congress, we're always willing to help figure out a way to make that happen. It's so important in the communities. But also, as a pastor, you may have someone who's at your church who is involved and has a relationship with a member of Congress. So there's a number of ways, I think, for everyone to help out.
George?
Not a lot to add to that. The fellowship has a program called Stand for Israel, which is a grassroots, primarily electronic advocacy program. It's led by a new hire, contemporary of Christina's in Washington. And we're trying to make sure that the pro-Israel voice is not perceived on Capitol Hill as just a Jewish voice. Because as you all heard this morning, and I know many of you knew it before you came in, Israel's not a Jewish issue. Israel is a Christian issue, and Israel is most certainly an American issue.
I want to direct this next question to both Bishop Ulmer and to Dr. Branch. I mentioned earlier when I made some opening comments about the Ethiopians. One thing I didn't say is that the Ethiopians that I initially talked to and asked, what is some of your most memorable moments or thoughts when you went to Israel? And most of them said that when they got there, the biggest surprise and shock was that they thought that all the Jews in Israel were going to look like them. That they actually thought that all the Jews in Israel were black. And one of the biggest surprises was that there were these white Jews in Israel. I want to ask you two gentlemen, Dr. Branch, you spoke about the historical perspective in America between blacks and Jews. And Bishop Ulmer, you talked about the theology and the biblical basis for the relationship. Do you, either one of you, feel that the black church and the black community in general is receptive of what you're saying, is in agreement with what you're saying, or is there a resistance, or just don't know what you're saying to be fact or not, or disengaged?
I think there are two issues. We talk about the black church in general, then I'll talk about our local congregation. The challenge that I have with the church in general is it's similar, well, it's a terrible way to put it, I guess, between what's happening between AIPAC and the fellowship, similar in that the issue of Israel in many of the circles that I run into is almost always politicized. And it's politicized in this sense. It is in the circles that I run in now. It is most often seen as a right-wing Republican issue. The flag wavers of the church toward Israel, in my circles again, is seen to be those who are, again, right-wing conservative, right-wing Republicans, the Jerry Falwells of the world, the Dotsons of the world, the Pat Robertsons of the world. And so the challenge that I have is that it is almost always, the challenge is to get through that political filter and to try to see that it's bigger than that. That's why I say this in Chicago. I think, examples that you guys have here in Chicago, like Kenneth Flowers and Dr. Branch and others, who don't have to sell out's a tough word, but don't have to give up their political persuasion, party persuasion, in order to support Israel. Did you get that? In other words, Dr. Branch and Kenneth Flowers and are good examples of the fact that I can be pro-Israel without being pro-Jerry Falwell. May he rest in something. He's dead. But without being Republican. Okay? So I can support Israel legitimately, theologically, biblically, spiritually, practically, etc. I can support it without having to vote Republican. So that's a challenge. In our case, in our local church, the thing that finally, two things, finally got the attention of our people. Our church, like all you guys, anytime you introduce something like this, it's a transition. For many of our congregations, something that we've never talked about or not talked about and not preached about a lot. And so it becomes an issue that you've got to consistently deal with, and yet you have to consistently deal with it sensitively. There's a sensitivity. Okay, so two things happen at our house. Number one, the idea, as I said earlier, that God connects a blessing to blessing Israel. They may not know Al Qaeda and they don't know ISIS. They know blessing. We know blessing. We can relate to that. We relate to blessing. And so that was a legitimate biblical principle and revelation. The second thing for us, and maybe even more than even that, was similar to what you said. When we found out that there are chocolate Jews, people of color. I have a spiritual son who pastors a church in Jerusalem. He is black, Ethiopian, Jewish, Christian, Pentecostal. That's about everything you can get. And he said to me, he calls me daddy, he said, "Daddy, we don't fit in anywhere." He said, well, we're black, there's a color issue there. He says, we're Jewish and we don't fit in with that group because we're Ethiopian. We're Christian, God knows we don't fit in with any of the Jewish groups. I found out that Messianic Judaism is not a very popular term in some circles. I thought that was a good link. That was a hatchet, man. That wasn't a link.
That's a curse word.
Yeah. So that's a whole other problem. He's Pentecostal, so even the churches that are over there, they're evangelical. He's speaking in tongues. They don't like him for that. So the brother can't win, you know. But our church embraced this young congregation, and the highlight of our trip every time we go is to have worship with these people. I mean, we never leave without being crying or on the floor or weeping or whatever, praying for them. So it's that kind of grassroots level down here, and then philosophical and theological connection up here. And however you can communicate on that level, I think you're going to get it. That's why the point that Dr. Plummer made, that there are hundreds of thousands, certainly over 100,000 Ethiopian Jews there. And one of the things that we've asked these other organizations about is, now, when you guys are talking about Israel, do you include us? You know, like I said earlier about being edited out. Is there any intentional focus on the Jews of color? Because our history and our experience is, if it is not an intentional attention, they'll fall through the cracks, and they'll miss some of that. Okay, so two things: the idea of being blessed, and secondly, the connection between the Jews of color.
Now, Dr. Branch is going to speak to this in a moment, but we're just about out of time. So maybe, Christine, if we can get 5 minutes over, maybe 5 after 2, because I know I was told 2 o'clock was it. So I want to give you all a chance if you have any questions. So, Dr. Branch, don't mean to give you 2 minutes, but you got 2 minutes.
I'll take 1.5.
All right.
The whole approach, I think, with AIPAC and with the fellowship, as well as what Dr. Bishop Ullman has said, in dealing with people, it's a question of dealing with people anywhere, and how you deal with people. If you deal with people from the top down, you got to deal with all of the hierarchy, all of the systems, the politics, everything like that. But if you deal with people from the bottom up, you're going to run into human beings that breathe and eat and hurt and everything. And to borrow from Jesse Jackson, which I don't do that a lot, but I borrowed this from Jesse Jackson, is that a stomach turned inside out, it doesn't have any color. And so when people hurt, when there's needs, we have to connect, and we have to, and Israel is a big part of this, because at the root of our faith is a connection. We can't read our Bibles without talking about Jerusalem and talking about the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee. So we're connected with the land, we're connected with the people in so many ways. But at the end of the day, when it boils down, we got to see each other eye to eye, and we got to walk down the street together. We got to do a number of things together, and we are all placed in this world for a reason. And the connections that we can make are always important. And as I go around the world, where there's a lot of places you can go to meet with the so-called powers that be, but to go down the street and around the corner over there, and to catch those people that's sitting, sitting there, just waiting, trying to find something to eat or something like that, and to talk to them and to get their story. Works all the time, because you know, whether there's negotiations going on about Hamas and Hezbollah or all of that, there's still some people who got to get up and go to work every day. There's some people who got to feed their kids. There's some people, you know, who got to do the common, everyday things that we do to live. And often they are not even a part of all of that stuff that's happening up here.
So we have a couple minutes left, so if you have any questions, I'll just repeat it for the sake of the recording. But please stand and speak it out. We don't have a mic to get to you, so if you can ask your question.
Okay, my question is twofold. I'll try and get it out as fast as I can. I'm Jody Matthews, and I'm a Jewish Messianic student, so I like to study from that, the Hebraic way of Scripture. And I have two questions, probably biblically and politically. So to Bishop and probably to you, David, when we deal with Israel, we know that they're connected with the blessings. Is Israel also, do any of you believe that Israel is also a direct link to the end times? I am one who believes that Israel, I stand with Israel and I pray for the peace of Jerusalem every day. But is Israel, the nation, also a direct link to the end times? I guess that's biblically, dealing with end time things. And also, politically, I guess, is there any negotiation, current negotiations, dealing with Temple Mount and a rebuilding of a third temple?
Okay, so I'll just repeat the question to Bishop Ulmer. Is Israel linked to end times? And then to Avi, is there negotiations regarding a third temple in Israel?
I'm not quite sure your meaning of link, so if I miss it, let me know. I think the point I was trying to argue in my presentation was that there is a theological position that says that it is not linked, that it is either not involved at all, or that it will only be at the end of the end. And my argument was that in these last and evil days, in the now and now, that there is this connection, this commonality between the church and Christianity. So I'm not saying I don't hear link as we got to go through them to do. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm really talking about, as I said, the common ground that we stand on, the fact that we're both in God's hand, the fact that God desires to use both of us in a common calling, a common choosing, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, and Avi?
Thank you for the question. So I'm not sure how familiar you are with Israeli politics or anyone, but if anyone thinks that it gets heated here in the United States, go to Israel. Oh my gosh, because there's so many political parties. There's political parties that represent the Arab population and the Jewish population.
Right.
And for the Jewish population, new parties are created all the time. So Israel was founded to be a secular nation, meaning that today the rabbis have authority over certain things, but for the most part it is a secular nation. And so I won't dive too much into that, but to address your question, I would say that's a debate for sure in Israel. However, it's also a very, as far as a political situation goes, it's something that is very heated because in the eyes of the Palestinians, the Temple Mount to them is a holy site. So when there's a two-state solution politically that would ever be agreed upon, the question would be, is Jerusalem a unified capital for both the Israelis and the Palestinians that is neutral, or is it given to Israel? Is it split between the Israelis and the Palestinians? So there's that end of it, and then to answer your question, yes, I think it's a debate. I don't know too much about it, but it's a debate between the more religious parties in Israel and the more secular parties. Yeah.
Okay, so we have maybe time for two more questions. So we have one here. Anybody else have a question before we kind of wrap it up? So perhaps this is then our last question, okay?
Pastor Griffin, Pilgrim Baptist Church in Detroit. To the bishop, you mentioned some things concerning our Christian mentioning of Israel in our preaching and teaching. Coming from a Judeo-Christian understanding, it all mashes together when we preach and teach anyway. For understanding Jesus was Jew,
Right.
understanding Christianity,
Right.
we don't have to mention Israel. All we have to do is mention Jesus.
Whatever works, works, man. I mean, what am I going to say to that? If you're doing it, you're doing it. And, you know,
So-
I think this though, and I was kind of joking, but I wasn't. You know, I think if on that level, here it is, if on that level, the people in that house sense a solidarity, if that solidarity, if that support, if that unity, if that common ground can be achieved on that level, hey, that's what it takes. Good. In my situation, well, I'll put it like this. We have a younger house. So I was telling somebody this yesterday. We used to be able to say, Daniel's in the lion's den, and you know the story, and 3 Hebrew boys in the Hebrew thing, and you know the story, and Moses crossed the Red Sea, you know the story. My crowd don't know the story. So I'm saying the assumptions that may be in your house, you know, and that may clear it. You know, everybody knows he's Jewish. My crowd didn't necessarily know that. I know that's very elementary, but my crowd did not necessarily know that Jews. My crowd did not know that the Bible was written by Jews. My crowd did not know that the first church was a Jewish church, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just saying, I tell my students to exegete the text and exegete the context. You know, make sure you know your house. And so in my house, I had to say more than that. And you know, your situation, it works. Hey, again, my thing is whatever works is what works. But for me, I had to go further than that because my crowd didn't know the story, man.
Bishop Ulmer, I think it might be worth also stating when we were in Chicago the day before yesterday, you asked the audience, when was the last time you heard a message preached about Israel?
Right. Right.
And that really challenged the group.
Right. I'll just leave it hanging there.
Yes. And I might as well say on that as well that preaching and learning to preach and the background of your preaching often does not include certain things.
Right.
So in seminary you didn't learn nothing about that. So it's like you preach basically what you're exposed to, and then your canon is a canon within the canon.
Right.
It doesn't include the whole canon.
Yes.
Right. I never had a prof, I never had a class that specifically and intentionally emphasized the Jewishness of the Bible, Jesus, church, and Israel. I never had it. I took a class that changed my life. At Hebrew Union College, the name of the class was Judaism and Christian Beginnings. The prof was who became a friend of mine, PhD from the University of Toronto, a rabbi, and that class taught about how the church was birthed in a Jewish context. I'd been preaching, I don't know how long, man. I just never heard that. It was revelation for me. So I'm saying again, I think you're on I think you're on target when you say, hey, in my situation, I have to do that. In mine, I have to go a little further because my folk ain't smart as yours, man. My people ain't smart as yours.
Well, we'll wrap it up and give Christina a final word, but because I've had a chance to hear the presentations both here in Detroit and in Chicago, as did Dora Hill, who's here. Wave at us, Sister Hill. She moderated the event in Chicago. It was just fantastic. You two gentlemen are just superb, splendid, extraordinary, fantastic. We thank both of you. And George, to you, as we said to Clark, who I think is Clark your boss?
Yes.
What are you at the fellowship? You're the chief operating officer?
He is. I'm the executive VP.
So I know I'm speaking for those here as well as in Chicago. We thank you for even giving this platform. Thank you for lunch. Thank you for the reach into our community. And we had Brian Abraham in Chicago, David, and so to APAC, we appreciate you all joining in the platform as well. So thank you as well. And that's it. Thank you all for coming. God bless you.